Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh? Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. Startups get the party, startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech, you know we got it, eh?
And welcome back to the Tacos and Tech podcast. I'm your host, Neal Bloom. I'm thrilled to have on my friend, Tony Martens, co-founder of Plantable. Hey, Tony, thanks for being on the pod.
Hey Neil, thanks for having me.
Oh, man, it's so good to have you on. Long time coming. I'm stoked to, hear again the Plantable story, which is just incredible. It is just such a cool growth story. It's a cool story of convergences of industries from agriculture, technology, food, science, like all the pieces that I think make a really good San Diego story, but really a good story of food, like where food is headed these days. So without further ado, tell us what's Plantable.
Yeah, so Plantable in a nutshell is we grow novel plants, and from these novel plants, we extract high value ingredients that improve nutrition, taste, and texture across industries like food, personal care, and animal feed.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to talk about all the ways that that is applied to the food system. But we got to know, how did Tony get applied to the food system? Where did Tony start and how did you end up here?
Yeah, that's a good question. Super random, I'm originally from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and I started my career in agricultural commodity trading. Focused more on traditional commodities like corn, soy, wheat, rice.
Fertilizers
Basically,
too? Were you in
no
okay.
fertilizers, more, let's say, actual like food components. The output of fertilizer,
Yeah.
but the output of fertilizer, and I think doing that for a couple of years was super insightful, right? Because there's a couple of things that you learn. First and foremost, like how fragile our
Mm,
food system is and has become. And secondly, how overly centralized it has become, right? I think a lot of people realize, okay, obviously, climate change is affecting, let's say, the yield and quality of crops around the world. We're seeing natural resource scarcity in the form of arable land or freshwater resources. But I think a lot of people don't realize also the geopolitical risks that come with our agricultural supply chain, where it's basically dominated by two or three regions in the world. Whereas, let's say, 65% of our global calorific intake is coming from four crops. And I think as climate change becomes, let's say, more prevalent and let's say geopolitical risks increase, which is something that we obviously have been seeing over the past couple of years, I think our food supply chain is genuinely threatened and at risk of falling apart. And I think right now we're living in a Western society where those effects are felt less than elsewhere in the world. But I think the risk of it starting to materially affect Western society is upon us, And
mm,
so I think with that in mind, small problem at hand, we were like, hey, what can we do? And then you start looking into, let's say, the fundamentals of our agricultural supply chain and realizing that we haven't really updated our supply chain for over 3,000 years, right? So the crops and animals that we grow today are the exact same animals and crops we grew 3,000 years ago. And for whatever reason, every other industry from transportation to, let's say, communication, we've all advanced from, let's say, horse and carriage to now having reusable space rockets. But but food is still the same as it was, right? And um, there has to be, let's say, an understanding that with today's know-how, today's understanding of what's good or better for the human body, we should be able to grow better organisms and convert those into higher value, better tasting products for consumers. And so, with that in mind, we started Plantable about 8 years ago, looking into like, hey, you know, first of all, like you have to pick your fight somewhere. And so we're like, okay, like what are like the critical components of a diet? Now, obviously, protein is one of the most critical components of our food system, where nutritionally, it's the building block of the human body. But then also functionally, it creates the textures of products that we love to eat. And so we're like, okay, great. Now let's look at our protein stack. You have soy, you have dairy, you have eggs, and beef or meat. These are all, let's say, ancient proteins, right? We've been consuming them for thousands of years. It's hard to, it's hard, it's hard to say that these are the best proteins we can produce for the human body, because these are the only ones that we have produced. And so, what if we start to look elsewhere in the protein landscape? And that led us to a protein known as rubisco, which, funnily enough, is one of the most abundant proteins on our planet because it's in every leafy green. So every time you eat kale or lettuce or spinach, you eat a little bit of rubisco. But for the past 80 to 90 years, this has been considered the holy grail of proteins. And because of its nutritional and functional superiority to animal and plant protein sources. And so we're like, oh, great. So if this is so great, why has nobody succeeded? Which then led us to the whole biology and supply chain aspect of producing rubisco, which then led us to like this little aquatic plant known as lenna, but also known by its less appetizing name, duckweed, which is the most rubisco efficient plant our planet has to offer. And so we're like, hey, great, let's connect one and let's connect two. And me and my co-founder, we quit our jobs and jumped on a plane and moved to San Diego to start this adventure.
Amazing. What I mean, you were sitting observing, you were seeing the food system. How did you know you had to do this? I'm sure there was a lot of opportunities that you're like, let's go in on. Why this one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like it comes back, right? So I think like I've always contemplated, me and my co-founder, we had always contemplated starting a business together.
Hmm.
And initially it was like, maybe do somewhere tech or software or whatever. And then we're like, well, maybe we want to do something that leaves the world in a better place, and we started to look at renewable energy. But I think like in renewable energy, it's a race to the bottom, I think, at the moment, where you have a lot of, let's say, horses in the race. And I don't think we would have been able to create a competitive advantage for ourselves. And then we're like, because of my background, we started to look in food. And in the food industry, once again, you see all of these issues where, it's like one of the most outdated, ancient industries that we have. And I think it's also one of the biggest and largest industries that has some serious macro and micro threats going at it. And so we're like, okay, but sometimes ignorance is a blessing. So I think that's, we're like, okay, let's just go. And 8 years later, we're still alive, so that's good. Yeah.
At least. Well, okay, hopping on a plane, you could have ended up anywhere. You could have stayed in Amsterdam. How'd you end up in
Yeah.
San Marcos, California to do this as a kickoff?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, we came up with this idea. We quit our jobs and we were in the attic of my ex-girlfriend's father. And we were, looking at like, okay, where are we going to do this? Right. So obviously we started in the Netherlands, worked with a couple of research institutes in the Netherlands, but we soon figured that like, okay, you can work with these research organizations and they're very smart, but they don't have the same agency and urgency as a founder or as a startup, right? So yeah, there's just a major disconnect. And then we're like, okay, cool, but also let's look at the regulatory landscape and let's look at financial landscape and like regulatory wise. And back in those days, financially, the United States made the most sense. And we then were like, okay, where in the United States are we going? And then through like one of our friends and family investors, we got in touch with this water recycling company out of Chicago that had built like this greenhouse facility for aquatic organisms in San Marcos. And they were trying to get rid of it. And, we Dutch people, were genetically frugal. So we asked them like, hey, can we get this facility for free? And they said like, well, if you take over the land lease, you can get all of the assets for free. And so we're like, great. So, we jumped on a plane and found ourselves in Southern California. This facility could have been anywhere. So, like, we were quite lucky. We were quite lucky.
Ah, well, what have you learned? What other assets have you found at your disposal for where you ended up? And how did it go? And I've seen the facility now, right?
Yeah.
The campus, if you will, plus
Oh,
RVs. How did it turn from, a facility to science to actual food production?
Yeah, I mean that's a journey on itself, right? So I think we got there and to put it mildly, the facility didn't look in its greatest shape. It's really been it wasn't treated well for the years in the years prior. Anyway, we got there, and the way we went about it is like, first of all, we got to the United States, we got to the facility, we realized like how expensive California is, and we're like, oh, okay, what are we gonna do, right? So we were like, okay, what are we gonna do? 'Cause we saw our money, our bank accounts, our personal savings evaporating, so we're like, okay, what are we gonna do? We created a list on LinkedIn of a variety of like angel investors in this space, and started to send them like messages on LinkedIn. And as you can imagine, the relative response rate of people to, hey, we're a couple of Dutch guys growing duckweed in a greenhouse, was fairly low, I would say. It was fairly low. But fortunately, a couple of guys responded, and they put us in touch with a pre-seed fund out of San Francisco called Unshackled. And one of the partners came down to our facility in San Marcos, checked it out, and was like, whatever. Like, these guys have a crazy story, and let me give them a chance. So they're like a fund solely focused on immigrant founders. So they gave us like 500K, and we were off to the races, right? And so we had a little facility. We started to refurbish, let's say, some of these greenhouses, started to grow some plant biomass material. And also in our little Breaking Bad trailer that was on site, we started to experiment with extracting the protein, right? And well, soon enough, we produced a couple of grams and started to send those to prospective customers. Those prospective customers then all came back like, "Wow, how can we get more of this stuff?" We're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, we might be onto something," you know what I mean? And so that was then in 2020, and we raised our seed round. And like with 2020, like everybody remembers, we raised our seed round, and 3 weeks later, Governor Newsom announced the lockdown. So we were like, oh, well, what are we going to do now? We have this money in our bank account. We need to move. Time is ticking. And so we basically bought a couple of RVs that same night on Craigslist, and then lived with our team, back then 5 people in total, on our farm for like 9 months, to go from like our little Breaking Bad trailer to having like a full-fledged pilot facility up and running. And here we that allowed us to go from the gram to the kilogram scale. And so we
Mhm.
were able to produce a couple of kilograms. And then once again, these customers stayed super excited. So one of them actually accelerated into a multi-million dollar commercial agreement. So we're like, oh, then we need to fill this commercial agreement. We need to build out a commercial facility. So then in 2022, we actually started to build out our first large-scale commercial facility. This time, not in California, it was a little bit too expensive, but then through one of our investors, we got in touch with a landowner in West Texas who had a beautiful ranch, a 20,000 acre ranch, that he wanted to convert into, let's say, new forms of sustainable agriculture. And so this is where we landed in late 2022. And then in Q3 of 2023, we had our first couple of greenhouses up and running and produced our first commercial quantities of our rubisco powder. And
Mhm.
fast forward, we now have a full-fledged manufacturing plant in West Texas
Awesome.
that we're expanding. Yeah,
Amazing. Wow. I didn't realize the timeline was so quick on that, from
yeah,
2020 to 2022, like that.
yeah.
W- Take me through the product iteration a little bit. Like, what was the original premise and idea that you knew Rubisco, the protein derived from Rubisco? Who were the first customers? Like, what were their use cases versus what are you scaling up for? Like, take us through product.
Yeah. Yeah, like obviously the food industry has changed a lot, right, over the past 5 years. And I mean mostly from a tech perspective. So obviously even though I have a vendetta against the word, but like, a couple of years ago, you had the whole alternative protein boom, right? So there was a huge demand coming from a lot of like these plant-based meat companies and whatsoever to improve their ingredient stack. Because as you can imagine, coming back to what I said earlier, I think this is also like one of the reasons why the products are the way they are. But like these companies had to deal with like ancient ingredients, like an ancient ingredient stack, and had to make the best of it, right? And so, you're like, okay, I've got some soy, I've got some pea, and let's see what I can do with these things. But it would have been a miracle if, let's say, 3,000 years ago, we predicted that one day soybeans were going to replace or outcompete meat, right? Anyway, long story short, so in the beginning, a lot of those companies wanted to buy our product. And
The alternative
that
protein companies. We're looking for uh,
Yeah, so they use
suppliers.
all of like these synthetic emulsifiers and binders. So if you think about the rubisco protein, so it's nutritionally very well put together. It's more bioavailable or digestible than any of the animal and plant proteins. It's a complete protein. It has the highest quality protein of all commercially available proteins at the moment, but it's also very functional. So it can create a foam, a gel, an emulsion, whatsoever. And so a lot of these companies wanted it to replace a lot of the synthetic ingredients that they have on their label and swap them out for protein. And so that's what we were mostly targeting in the beginning, and what we're seeing, let's say, most of the demand coming from. Now, that was just that boom at that point in time, and that catalyzed some of the initial growth. But in parallel, other industries, so think about like egg reduction or egg replacement, dairy reduction or dairy replacement, we're also, let's say, equally interested along that journey. And so I think what's interesting about those two markets is that it's much more of a supply chain and allergenicity play. So, like if you think about eggs, we all remember, let's say, the avian flu outbreak from last year, where, like a dozen of eggs that costed like $15 at one point in retail, and if you're a food manufacturer and you buy that as a raw material for your products, you can't really deal with like a 40% price volatility on an annual basis, right? And so that's where our little Ruby protein also plays a critical role in actually replacing or reducing the amount of eggs that these food companies need and creating a more stable supply chain along the way as well. And so that's where we see most of our growth today, where you can imagine that the demand from the plant-based meat industry has been a little bit stagnant.
Yeah, it's flattened a little bit. But I think it was a necessary step for humans to finally question what are we putting in our bodies and how does it made, right? So, right? I mean, I think and we're
100%.
continuously, as at least Americans right now, on a journey of questioning the entire system. Is that what it
I
feels like?
think, yeah. I mean, I think I think the industry is not created equal, right? And so I think somebody once explained to me this great, like the way they look at it, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like you can put whatever you want into a cow, a chicken, or a pig, and the only thing you have to label on the ingredient labels beef, chicken, or pork, right? If
Yeah.
you put that same stuff into a machine, suddenly you have to label everything that you put into that machine, right? And then suddenly people say like, "Oh my God, this is like so many ingredients. It's not a clean label." Whereas like there's just regulations around what you have to list, right? And I think fundamentally, um, I think there is an opportunity for the industry to take a close look and, to your point, reassess what we're putting in our bodies. How does it make us feel? Is it maybe it was great for the past 3,000 years, but is it still the best for the next 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years if we want to further evolve as a human species, right? If we want to focus on longevity, health, quality of life, I think food, I think a lot of people have forgotten that, as what's this Hippopotamus once said, like, let food be thy medicine. And I think as a society, we've drifted away from that, although now consumers are becoming more conscious, right? And there's more focus on what do we put in our bodies and like what is actually good for us, and I think that to your point, we're at an interesting time that's becoming actually reassessed and reevaluated.
Yeah, well, good time to be scaling up and
Uh,
offering this en masse. What have you learned about scaling from where you had your plant to where you were able to produce now?
yeah, it's actually I recently was asked that same question. I think, I think what it really comes down to scaling is like, um, I recently read this book, like How to Build Big Things. It's awesome. I think it's all about modularity, right? I think the problem that we've seen in the climate tech space, or let's say also food tech space, is that people went from like 0 million to $100 million capex projects and built like huge capacity where demand was yet to be proven. And
Mhm.
obviously, once you build like a large factory, it becomes like this cookie monster that wants to consume cash every day, right? Cash, cash, cash. And so I think, and it's really hard to turn that around, right? And so I think what have we learned is like, hey, how can you create these incremental steps where obviously you can go from lab to pilot to demo to commercial scale, but even when you're a demo or commercial scale, what is the smallest module that your, let's say, modular unit that you can operate at, and how can you gradually build that out instead of like, okay, I just go big and massive, and then you have to fill that capacity, right? Because specifically in food, I think the sales cycles are slightly different than, for example, in energy projects, where in energy projects, you produce an electron, you can sell that to the grid, and there's a price for that, right?
Yeah.
In food, that's not necessarily how it works, right? You produce a component, and then that has to be in the B2B space at least. You produce a component, and that has to be formulated into a consumer product, right? Or let's say if you have produced a consumer product, that needs to go on a shelf. A consumer needs to buy it. You know what I mean? There's no guaranteed offtake from the beginning, right? And I think therefore, if you get ahead of your skis, you build this large cookie monster, it just starts to consume cash, and it just starts to consume all the bandwidth that you have in your company. And so I think modularity and being able to be very skill and cost conscious, I think is the biggest learning, to be gained.
That's really interesting. Just because and kind of back to your commodity mentality.
Yeah,
Food as a commodity, how tiny those margins are and what that stacks along the way, for sure.
yeah.
Where when did you realize like this was food grade in a sense, right? When did you know, besides the customer saying we want more, when was the real, I don't know, use case that you're like, oh, this can scale, especially with your commodity mentality?
Yeah, I think like, there's obviously like everybody can do everything in the lab, right? So I think like when you can do stuff in the lab, you know, that's great. People can perform everything. And then you go like, okay, lab to pilot. And
Yeah.
I think pilot is a loosely used term generally, right? So like I once spoke to an investor who said that they were talking to a startup. It's like, oh, we built out a pilot facility, and they had pictures in their deck, and then it was just basically a wide angle camera that they used to make it look very big, but it was actually still like a benchtop scale up situation. Anyway,
Yeah.
but so I think once we went to pilot, once we went to pilot and really proved that we can use industrial scale machinery and equipment, be it the smallest size, right? Be it the smallest size, but still industrial equipment, showcase that we can still hit, let's say, the specifications from a quality. So think about, let's say, taste, functionality, nutrition, but also from a food safety perspective. And that actually converted some of these people that were excited, hey, when we produced the grams, that they were like, hey, well, we want to buy, now that we've tested the kilograms, we want to buy metric tons of your product. I was like, wow, okay, we might be really like, this is quite serious now, right? So the next step is really to build out a commercial sized operation. But I think that first multi-million dollar commercial agreement from like a multinational food company, I think for me was like truly the validation, like, hey, there might be something here versus, you can have like a restaurant or a small company, nothing against a restaurant or a small company, but they might just want to differentiate, right? Whereas if like you have a multinational company, they just want to optimize their own operations and business model, so yeah.
Yeah. And it means you're making an impact on the food system, right?
Yes, exactly.
Are you able to, I know you're an ingredient in many food products? Are you able to share where we could be eating plantable foods right now?
We're actually we've launched with some customers across Sprouts, Gelson's. We're now going into some other large national retailers through a couple of brands. I've been told that I cannot yet disclose it, but it's pretty exciting, I would say. And so, yeah, I think we're making like right now. Our biggest distribution is in the bakery aisle, where we're replacing whole eggs, egg whites across a wide range of various products. Yeah.
Okay. And I know there's sauces and other things that you'll be able to share at some point too.
Yeah. No, it's
Okay.
exciting. Yeah.
It's very exciting. Well, congrats, man. Man,
Yeah.
what a good feeling it feels, but also it feels like, well, now the bar is here and we got to go do the next thing. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we're still not there, right? I mean, like it's good. I mean, like I think as a founder, sometimes you forget to look back and enjoy what you've accomplished. And you're just like, oh my God, just consumed by the problem of the day,
Yeah.
but I think overall we're on the right track. Our next step is like I said, I think like right now we're focusing on like this plant, we're focusing on the ingredients that we can sell to companies. But like what we're doing in the back end is basically trying to develop a whole new form of agriculture, right? Where you build, let's say, these large greenhouses with these, let's say, ponds inside of them, which then opens the door to evaluate other aquatic organisms beyond, let's say, the lemna or duckweed that we're growing today, right? And so if you think about it, there doesn't really exist any aquatic plant supply chain at the moment. They're all very micro scale. So if we can standardize, let's say, the formula and the platform, to use a cheesy word, we can basically hopefully duplicate that same platform over and over and over again, whether that's locally in Texas, but also eventually internationally in Europe,
Okay.
you know, Asia, Southern America, etc.
Got it. And so when you're successful doing that, scaling your own plants, what do you think the food system looks like differently in 5+ years because of this?
Yeah, drastically not. No, I think I think in the food system, there's no one like there's no silver bullet, all
Right.
right? I think there is an element of like how can we relieve pressure of our existing supply chains, right? I
Mm,
think how can we relieve pressure of our existing supply chains? That's going to be super important, right? Because if you look at agriculture as a whole, it's the largest consumer of fresh water, it's the largest consumer of land. It's one of the, if not the single largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Like there's a lot of things that are not working in agriculture's favor these days.
Sure.
And yeah, and so I think we have to really think about, hey, how can we diversify our supply chains, but also how can we upgrade our supply chains by gradually facing in newer, better performing toolkits that, alleviate the natural resource pressure, but also improve the health and quality of the food products that we consume, right? And I think, hopefully 5 years from now, Plantable has been able to play a critical role where on the one hand, where we've deployed multiple of these manufacturing modules around the world that don't require arable land, that use a fraction of the water that our existing supply chains use, and that produce ingredients that are better for consumers around the world. Um, and that's what I hope to achieve. And I think like hopefully it also creates, let's say, an opportunity for other companies around the world to innovate and improve, let's say, the ingredient stack in the food system.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it's right place, right time right now where we as a nation are starting to realize some of the national security aspects to owning our own supply
Mm,
chain, right? Also the changing landscape of labor is going through
yeah.
a big ringer right now, right? Where we're realizing we need hard trades and blue collar work again, and manufacturing jobs need to be retaught on new modern things. So what a tailwind to ride on of, changing also the way that we're going to scale, grow, and eat. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Be part of.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think I think like the problem with farming is, right, and I think that's even like a double whammy, I would say, is that I think the problem with farmers in the United States, but also globally, I think as a profession, it has amongst the highest suicide rates.
Oh,
And the issue is that, if you look at like consumer products are adjusted for inflation, right?
mhm.
Agricultural crops aren't necessarily adjusted for
Mm.
inflation, right? And so you can see how farmers are getting squeezed, where if they buy products on the shelf, they have to pay a higher price every year, but their income doesn't necessarily increase year by year. On top of that, the issue that they're running into is that because of industrial agriculture, the lands that they grow their crops on are becoming less and less fertile. So overall yields might go down, or if they want to maintain the same yields, they need to increase the amount of fertilizer and inputs that they use in order to grow those crops, and so their costs increase, right? But still, let's say with a relative ceiling as to like what they can sell their products for. And so I think how can you develop once again new agricultural systems that allow farmers around the world to actually improve the ROI on the lands they operate, right? And how can you help them create a more stable, gradually higher income for themselves? And what we've done is we've gone to like West Texas. We're in a relatively rural part where historically they were producing a lot of, let's say, cotton and wool, but because of, let's say, changing, let's say, natural resources and weather patterns, actually those industries have died down quite a bit. Obviously, they had oil and gas in West Texas, but that's a boom and bust industry as a whole, and it's been gradually decreasing over the past years as wells start to dry up. That being said, so you have like a lot of these towns that I've realized in the United States that still have people living there, but where there's just simply not a lot of economic opportunity. And so ever since we landed in West Texas in El Dorado, and I wouldn't say that this is all because of Plantable, but having been there for 3 years and having seen the relative economic activity in the area, the median household income in this small rural county increased by 62%, right? Because we're coming there, we're creating better paying jobs, educating these people about, let's say, new forms of farming, new forms of food production, and overall are able to increase the overall living wage for these rural communities, which is, I think, super exciting. And I really hope that we can use that as proof to validate our model, where it not only produces better ingredients, but it can also lift rural economies out of poverty and give them work to be proud of.
100%. Wow. So from a commodity trading idea in Amsterdam to a crazy lab in San Marcos to scaled manufacturing and a whole new workforce development in West Texas. Like, what a story
Yeah,
that you're
yeah.
impacting. And yet at the end of the day, we all got to eat. And some of us and many of us here are eating tacos, is the way that we're
Oof.
doing it. People got to know, one, your favorite taco, and two, does it have rubisco in it?
Nah, shit. Yeah, well, it might have a little bit of rubisco in it because of the leafy greens that are in there, right? But
Uh-huh.
my favorite taco spot is the taco stand. It might be a cheesy answer, but I think it's my favorite. It's in the one that I go to is in Encinitas.
Oh yeah.
Shout out taco stand. Please
Oh
give me a
yeah. Long
discount.
line. Always.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we
long
got you.
line. Yeah, the line are like,
But
and I
but
like
the move is
the
order ahead so that you just pick up and you can eat
it.
there.
Yeah, does that work? Because I've tried it so many times, and then it's like well, it's
It's
unavailable. Yeah,
oh, maybe
yeah.
not. People no,
I heard about this. Yeah.
we shared it on the show too many times. I guess the secret's out. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. Is the taco stand? Anyway, I love their fish taco. I love their fish taco. I think it's amazing. Yeah. So
It's
taco
great.
stand. Mm.
It has been the most mentioned spot on the pod, so you're in good
Is that
company.
right?
Most
Shit.
of all founders love taco stands. So you're in good
Yeah.
company, you know?
That's good.
You
That's
got the
good.
right
Yeah.
answer there for sure.
Yeah.
The one down the street from there is City Tacos. That's our third most mentioned, and they have about 40 or 50 different kinds of tacos on their menu. And so
Wow.
when you're like too long of a line, you head to City Tacos, you try a different kind of taco there. Like they have a cactus taco, a zucchini taco, a mushroom
Mm.
taco. So
That's a lot, though.
they've got some plant-based
They
tacos
got some
there.
plant options. Okay, that's good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Like here in Austin, Texas, there's this place called Veracruz.
oh yeah,
Uh,
in the
it's
hotel,
also
right?
yeah, yeah. In the Line Hotel, there's one. Yeah, correct. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And
Yep.
but they have some really good tacos as well. Really good
Oh, they do.
tacos.
But Austin
Yeah,
in Texas is known for the breakfast taco, right? Isn't that the way?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, they
Yeah.
love it. Yeah,
Love a good
yeah.
breakfast taco with some eggs in it, you know?
Oh, for sure,
Uh,
for sure. Yeah.
and then if you can, is there queso is also the big thing, right? The Tex-Mex
Yeah,
queso.
I like queso is something as a European that still needs to grow on me, you know.
Okay.
But yeah. But I think
Yeah.
Tex-Mex, yes, for sure. Yeah.
And then obviously barbecue, anything brisket, ribs, right?
Yes, lot of barbecue, a lot of barbecue for sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like, the food scene is it's good in Texas, I would say.
What about ag tech in Texas? I mean, are you meeting other founders doing interesting things in agriculture technology?
I would say EdTech. There are actually quite a lot of large food manufacturing companies
Mhm.
in Texas, right? So they have some manufacturing facilities here. I do think there are some greenhouse operators. I have like there's a lot of defense tech I feel in Texas. I like overall, and actually Austin at least, there's a lot of, let's say, CPG innovation, right? So there's a lot of, let's say, CPG brands that are like Siete and whatnot. They all, and I think
Yeah.
Poppy was also out of Austin. So on the CPG side, AgTech, I think I haven't come across that many AgTech
Well,
founders yet there.
you'll
Yeah.
have to lead the charge in
Oh yes, yeah.
yeah, once they start having like the robots come to your facility to see, hey, how can
Oh, that's
we
right. Yeah.
your
Yeah.
manufacturing, right?
Yeah,
Optimus is going to be built just down the street,
I hope
so
so. I'm excited to see. I'm
yeah.
excited to see what that's gonna look like. Yeah.
And same back in Escondido now, where we're building, we finally already got the keys and are building out our AgX Food Hub Innovation Center, where we definitely are looking forward to having you back to kind of see
Can't wait.
yeah, when that's on the ground and going. So,
That's awesome, man.
Tony, thanks so much for the time, but even more, thanks for making a global impact on something that we do every
Yeah.
day. Eat.
Step by step. Yeah.
You
Thanks,
bet.
Neil.
Thank you. Cheers.
Tacos and tech is on smash for the green guacamole. Keep accountants counting beans. Contador cuentan frijoles. Founders trying to raise some queso. La vida San Diego. School of rappy, rapping fire. Tortillas round jalapenos. In these modern times of craft beer and coffee, my coding yoga posse. Fold the body, origami. We be surfing Coronado. Eating tacos el gordo. The tacos stand in puesto. Lucha libre and sombrero. Gotta shout out Tecos Daniels by the ocean. Watch the sunset. La Jolla shores. Entrepreneurs trying to get funded. When San Diego Startup Week is popping in the summer. Oceanside to Tijuana. ST be full of hustlers. From couch surfing to penthouses right on the beach. Tech leaders who believe stars are within reach. We interviewing founders who be shooting for the moon. Hashtag SD Tecos with your host Neal Bloom. Come on. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. You want tech and tacos, tacos and tech. You know we got it. Hey. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the party. Startups get the party started. Startups get the